Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. This week, I took the show on the road to Las Vegas to meet with Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson. He has lived and practiced law in Las Vegas for over 40 years and has served as the DA since 2012. Prior to that, he served on the Las Vegas City Council and had maintained his criminal defense law practice. Many of us have jobs where we encounter critical events that require us to urgently respond and test our ability to handle a crisis. I thought it would be interesting to talk with Steve to better understand how he deals with the crisis management in his DA office that handles over 75,000 cases a year, especially in the context of his latest high-profile cases, including the arrest of Duane Keefe D. Davis in the Tupac Shakur murder, the UNLV shooting by a disgruntled professor, and the November murder of teen Jonathan Lewis, who was beaten to death on video by a mob of high school students. This episode explores crisis management and evaluates the process and approach for responding to critical events. In high-profile cases, having a unique background in both prosecution and criminal defense law can allow for a quick understanding of both perspectives while framing up complex issues and providing a timely response to the community and the media. I hope you enjoy. Good morning, Steve. How you doing?
Good morning, Troy. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah. So for the listeners, we're sitting here at the District Attorney Office here in Clark County, which is actually in the center of Las Vegas. So I really appreciate you hosting me today. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. I've got a bunch of things that I'd like to talk to you about today, but a little bit of history. It's a little nostalgic being here. My family, from the 50s and 60s would come to Las Vegas. Then they would come home as kids and tell us these great stories of all the stuff happening in Vegas, mainly off the downtown area. And then in the later years, started coming out here at the Strip, Lake Mead. And so, and then probably the early 2000s did a bunch of corporate restructuring for companies that were doing shared services work, setting up businesses in the U.S. and Henderson. So out there. And so I've spent 2 or 3 years in hotels here. And so it's just an honor to be here. And with all of your history, I'm just looking forward for us getting into that a little bit.
Well, you and I have, some similarities. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. And my parents were bringing me here as a teenager. In fact, my parents, who are gone now, got married here in Las Vegas, about a mile from where we're sitting right now by a justice of the peace back then.
Oh, my gosh.
So I was coming to Las Vegas as a teenager. And then when I got a little older, me and the buddies would jump in the car and come here with $50 in our pocket trying to win a hotel. So I go way back visiting Las Vegas. I never thought that I would end up here.
Yeah. And before the interview, you and I were talking the amount of people that have moved here and how big the city has become, and watching this. A lot of when the corporations were coming here, there was a lot of technology modernization happening in the entertainment and casino business, but a lot of Fortune 500 companies that I would do work for would want to set up here. And it was interesting, just as an aside, and I won't mention company specific, but I would be the person that would put together the business case for setting up, consolidating all operations for finance, IT, et cetera, somewhere in the U.S. And we would always get to Las Vegas was very business friendly, but a lot of the boards didn't want to have Las Vegas be like where their business was,
sure,
outside of that industry, because it had a perception of,
yes.
And we were doing the finance stuff, so it was like, do they? So everybody did Henderson. That was
that's funny.
Yeah. But yeah, and then hey, what I was hoping to also be able to do a little bit is, I wanted to go through your origin story, talk a little bit about, like you said, born and raised in California, and your history getting here into Las Vegas, but also, taking a look at the steps that you've taken to credential yourself as you've worked your way up to the district attorney, and also a little bit what you and I've talked about was, kind of. We both started in an area, used education to kind of get to one point, and then kind of parlayed that to the next level. And when I look at your career, 40 plus years, you definitely have been on a trajectory. And I think that's the part I would like to kind of share with the listeners. If you wouldn't mind, just maybe a little bit more of your story, growing up in California, and then take us to the journey here.
Sure, I would call it a typical childhood. I was raised in the San Fernando Valley, grew up right in the heart of Van Nuys. Used to cruise Van Nuys Boulevard for those Los Angelans that remember that. Mm-hmm. Went to college in San Diego, went to law school in San Diego. When I was growing up, I never thought that I would have a desk job. I was an athlete. I played high school baseball, high school basketball, little college baseball. Never thought I'd be behind a desk. So growing up, I wanted to be a police officer. I wanted to be a cop in the LAPD. I thought that would be cool, outdoors, not a desk job. Mm-hmm. So I went to school and I got my degree in criminal justice from San Diego State, thinking that would be a good catapulting to being a cop. But when I was graduating San Diego State in 1977, I was told that there was a 500-person waiting list to get on the LAPD. Back then in the mid to late 70s, they were looking for females and people of color. Mm-hmm. I was neither. So all of a sudden, I wanted to be a cop, but the odds on me becoming a cop, grew slimmer and slimmer. So somebody said, go to law school. I literally went like this, like, are you talking about me? There's no lawyers in the family.
Right.
But then I thought, if I go to law school, I can stay in school in San Diego. What's better than that?
There you go.
So I applied, I went to law school, and getting out of law school, I thought that I would stay in San Diego. San Diego is a beautiful, beautiful city. Mm-hmm. Climate, entertainment, mm-hmm. casual way of life. Mm-hmm. But then my last year of law school, there was a notice in the job placement board, law clerk in the Clark County DA's office. I had to ask my buddy where Clark County was because I knew Las Vegas as just that, Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And he says, that's Las Vegas, you idiot. So kind of on a whim, I sat for an interview and they offered me a job to be a law clerk in the DA's office in Las Vegas. This is 1980. I remember calling up my dad and saying, Dad, I just got offered a job in Vegas. Oh. And I asked the guy if I could have a day or two to think about it. And he said, yes. And my dad said, take it. Mm. So the next thing I know, I'm moving to Las Vegas to go to work in the Clark County DA's office, a prosecutor's office. Mm-hmm. So that was 43 years ago. Wow. I thought I'd move to Las Vegas to get some experience and go right back to San Diego. But I fell into a profession. I fell into an office that I truly loved back then. Met my wife of now 39 years, raised a family. So that's kind of the background.
So
Troy.
when you being here and I know the way the DA's office is structured, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, starting out as a clerk and then eventually people working their way into being kind of the assistant DAs. Mm-hmm. When you first came in and you started kind of going, hey, I'm doing this and I'm liking it. Did you see yourself staying in the district attorney's office? Because I know eventually, we'll talk about your next transition to mm-hmm. federal, but at that point, what was your impression? Did you need to kind of fill out your background and add another dimension to it? Or did you just say, hey, I'm not sure yet if this is where I wanted to be?
The first few years were so much fun because I was a trial attorney. Mm. I did 45 trials in about 6 years. That was fun. Trial work is fun. Mm-hmm. But then I got married in 1984 mm-hmm. and started to have a family and everything like that. And after you did something for a while, I was looking to move on. So there was an opening in the U.S. Attorney's Office to be a federal prosecutor. Mm-hmm. I thought that would be interesting for a while. So I went there for a couple years. But then I met a guy who was in private practice and he offered me a job. And I remember it took me about 6 months to decide leaving the comfort of a government job and going into the private sector. Am I going to make it and all that? But I made that jump, and that was 1987. And I was in private practice then for the next 25 years.
So your background, when you take a look at it, at the DA's office, you're handling county stuff, the federal prosecuting, you're going through a much different level of crime. Then you switch over to really defending criminals, right? Criminal defense. So
I like to say people accused of committing crimes.
Of course
That's a little
you
bit
do.
more politically accurate.
But I think, it's kind of interesting is that like you learn, you've got both sides of it. And I would think that would be super valuable in starting, to get into criminal defense law, just to start with but after you got in, you didn't just go and work with the buddy that said, hey, you should do this. You started looking at entrepreneurially, or however it would be determined in the legal field, as maybe I should start a practice and do something bigger than just, be doing this by myself. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I remember when I first went into the private sector, one of the biggest reasons people hired me is because they knew I was a DA. Oh, you were a DA, so you know that side real well. So I had a lot of people hire me to be their lawyer because I was a prosecutor. And then I started to enjoy the fruits of private practice. I mean, to be honest, I started making money, and it was fun. I remember back in the late 80s, Jackie and I had purchased a house, and it was an older house, and it rained real hard one winter. And all of a sudden, my roof is leaking. And I, had the roofer come out to give me an estimate, and it was $4,000 to fix my roof. Again, this is 35 years ago, and a few years ago when I was a government lawyer, I didn't have $4,000 in cash, but because I was in the private sector, I wrote a check. Now that was a real nice thing. So private practice was a lot of fun because I made a good living at it, but I really enjoyed helping people. I enjoyed spending time with people. I enjoyed most of my clients, and I represented some pretty heavy-duty people. But I enjoyed the interaction. My wife later joined me, and we were partners for 12 years. And just really enjoyed helping people. Las Vegas back then, I'm going back to 1987, all the way through 2012, was a much smaller area. So you knew everybody. And I really enjoyed the private sector. But like anything else, after you do something for a while, some people want to do something for their entire career. I like to make changes. I call it professional maturity, where I needed to move on to something different.
So I got a question. So very similar to you, left corporate, went to starting a company, a consulting company. And, you could be the best consultant by yourself, but eventually you have a great network, so, it's not just practicing law. You got a network to try to get your clients and get all that moving. Something that's interesting about your background is, eventually to declare your eminence and to declare your brand in the market, you started looking at potentially ways of doing that through the media. And I know for management consulting, for me, it's not something that you advertise on TV because our clients are not retail. They're not people on the street. They're Fortune 500 executives and department heads of big agencies. And but I wanted to talk a little bit about like your strategy for eminence and how you started to build a brand. Because being from Southern California, they have all these TV ads that come on and they kind of start going through personal injury, criminal defense. So you don't really see that. And through my research, if you wouldn't mind, just talk a little bit about kind of how you branded your firm and how did you use entertainment or media to really start to promote your brand?
So I entered the private sector in 1987. I was a junior partner in a small civil firm. But I did exclusively criminal defense. And after a couple years, this is going to sound so conceited, but I always knew that I was going to do well, but I wanted to speed up the process. So I went to my then partner, this is only a couple years into the private sector, and said, I want to go on TV. I want to advertise my criminal practice on TV. He said, go for it. So with a very small budget, I started advertising my criminal practice on television. I was the first lawyer to advertise criminal defense on television. And then my wife joined me in our practice a year later. And for about 10 years, we advertised on television a criminal defense practice. In fact, our mantra, our saying was, Wolfson and Glass for your defense. And I remember there was a television show back then, Judd for the Defense. I mean, this is going back 30 years ago or so. And I was always waiting for that knock on the door from some lawyer saying, hey, you adopted our phrase and you can't do that. That never happened. So it was Wolfson for the defense, my wife and I advertising our criminal practice. And it succeeded. Another thing was back then, before the internet, Yellow Pages was big. So I was the first lawyer to advertise a full page ad in the Yellow Pages, and then eventually what they called a double truck. So when you'd open up the Yellow Pages, I'd be on both the left-hand and right-hand side. Got a lot of business from the Yellow Pages, which people don't use now.
That business model too, like you said, social media, people talk about that in the modern day. I do remember, that, a lot of companies back in that day would kind of go through and try to use that. Had to be a pretty big expense before you knew whether you're going to actually get something out of it. Because sometimes what I've noticed, I've started a lot of different companies, and again, none of them really retail, but I have buddies that have, and they'll put money into a full campaign, and it's like shooting a bullet. You don't know if it's going to happen or not, and it's a lot of money to put out there up front to then start to see who's actually signing up. Is it motivating behavior? So that had to be a little nerve-wracking after the first investment and seeing all that out there, because once you start to consistency is a big deal. Sort of like running a campaign. You can't just put one piece out. You need to kind of keep it in a sequence to keep more and more.
You don't get clients over a month or two of advertising. It's a buildup. It's a cumulative effect.
Did you see a dramatic increase at the very beginning when you started doing that, or did it come up over time?
I think we saw an increase. And, first there was the television and then the Yellow Pages. And I always wanted to know whether there was a return on investment. But how do you gauge that?
Right.
So when clients would come in on the intake sheet, at the very bottom, it would say referred by. And, they would put either the name of somebody that referred or television ad. And I would ask people, well, how did you come to hire me? And, after a while, the vibe I picked up was, you're doing this for your own benefit. You're doing this for your own media, study. And they didn't like it. So I stopped asking. So my kind of way of looking at things was I always, made a pretty good living. So I don't know whether it was the advertising or something else. But the old saying, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So I just kept going. I remember the Yellow Pages, and I'm going back to the 90s and the 2000s. It was about $15,000 a month just for Yellow Page advertising. Again, this is 20, 30 years ago. And that was a big check. And I hated that day when I had to write the check. But at the end of the month, when I saw how much money was coming in, I was okay with it. And then, as you're going through, a couple things start to come into play. You're doing work like this, and it was very similar, I think, maybe to my situation. Is you start making decent money doing what you're doing, and then you start looking around going, how can I give back to my community? And, part of it is, you're in the thick of your best part of your career, but you do start to feel this altruism of wanting to try to help the community. For me, our community was having financial problems. I'm a finance guy, so I ran for city council. You had a similar path. I don't know what drove you, but could you talk about you actually ran for the Las Vegas City Council and did a pivot. And I think that started a little bit of a different trajectory. Talk about that intersection. I did. When I was about 50 years old, I'd been in private practice now for 20 years or so. I wanted to do something different because the private practice of law was a grind. I was at my desk by 6 a.m. every morning to be prepared for that day's events, going to court and seeing clients. And, the grind was starting to wear on me. I needed to do something different. Back then, 20 years ago, Oscar Goodman was the mayor of Las Vegas, very colorful figure. He was the mob's lawyer, and he ran for mayor and won. So he was the mayor of Las Vegas. And there was an opening on the city council in my ward. That's what they called it, my area of the city. So I thought to myself, wow, maybe this is something that I would enjoy. I was not political back then, but I followed the local politics a little. And I went to my wife and I said, there's an opening on the city council. So back then, the city council had to decide whether to appoint the successor or declare a special election. So there was a bunch of lobbying by a bunch of candidates, and they declared that they would have a special election. So I was a private criminal defense lawyer, and I was up against some very powerful people. The chairman of the planning commission, another person who was one of the mayor's real good friends. So 12 of us filed in a special election, which took 6 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
In the spring and early summer of 2004, winner take all. And I hired a political consultant, and I won. I think I got 24% of the vote.
Yeah.
The other 11 people got less, and that's why I won in 2004. So I was elected to the Las Vegas City Council. Then in 2005, I had to run for my own 4-year term, no opponent. 2009, same thing, had to run for another 4 years. I was fortunate enough to have no opponent again.
Yeah.
So I was lucky.
Yeah. That happened. I ran 3 campaigns just like you, and the last one, didn't really have any competition. But, and that says something too, because the community, the people, people like you and I, when you first start, you take a look at the races and you're like, first of all, is it an open seat? Because it's hard to take out an incumbent unless they've done something really bad. And then once you're in, that middle term is usually the one where you really field tested. But the dynamics of being on a city council, and eventually, through that process, what I loved about being on it is, first of all, helping my community, but I also got to be on a lot of boards and commissions in the county. And through that process, you start to meet a lot of the higher electeds, not only within the county, within the cities, your state representatives, and your Congress, and sometimes the Senate. And, and I think through that, I really started to really quickly gain a network of something that was totally not corporate. And, as you're going through you're still kind of balancing a little bit of your professional life outside, because as you know, city council is not full time. And I've heard you say that in some of your interviews.
Correct.
But talk about, like, a lot of people think, oh my God, I'm going to go change the city or my ward. But when you're one of 7, it's a little bit harder than people think. And how did you deal with sometimes the frustration of being one of 7 or whatever, when you had things you really wanted to accomplish and you realize, like, sometimes I can't work with these people, and building that relationship?
It's called politics. I became a politician when I became a city councilman. I got a lot of new friends. I got a new title. It was called councilman, Councilman Wolfson instead of Steve, or Hey You. But it's about consensus building. It's about trying to be on the right side of issues. When I became a councilman in 2004, the city of Las Vegas had a lot of money. We had a lot of money to spend. The tax revenues were there, so I was able to do some good things for my ward. Downtown Las Vegas was growing exponentially. We created the Downtown Furniture Mart. We created the Premium Outlet Mall. We created the Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health, which is one of the most prestigious medical facilities in the world, right here in Las Vegas. I was part of that, being on the city council. So there were a lot of good times when we all agreed, if you will. But then 2008 hit with the recession. And all of a sudden we had to make some difficult choices. We had to cut back because the revenue streams tightened up, if you will. We were one of the first municipalities to go to a 4-day work week to cut back on the labor costs. And those were some tough decisions, if you will, because now we're shutting government down on Fridays when people have the normal expectation of, Monday through Friday. But it was basically all about relationships and talking to people and communicating. Sometimes I was on the right side. Sometimes I had to do some very difficult things because I go with my conscience. I really believe in right and wrong. I want to sleep at night. I'm not perfect like anybody else. But I had to make some difficult decisions along the way. But I loved being a city councilman.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved it. I felt so intertwined into the community. You're going to all the events. You're having an opportunity to see what's really going on. Let's talk about 2011, 2012. David Roger, district attorney for Las Vegas, decides to step down. On the surface, not being on the inside, but it looks like the guy ended up running for a 4-year term. 1 year into it, decides it's time to retire. Been in the job for a bit. We've had that in Orange County where not so much for the DA, but when people do, then like you said, it's a feeding frenzy again. Do they appoint or do they go through a special election? I'm just kind of curious, as you were sitting there looking at this, you're a councilman, you're a lawyer. Did you always kind of think a little bit like, I might sometime run for DA, or did all of a sudden when it came up, it was like, well, okay, here's an opportunity?
Kind of both. Back in 2010, I'd been in private practice a long time. I'd been a lawyer a long time. I'm in my mid-50s, if you will, and thinking about the future. As I'm sure you know, Troy, as you get older, your priorities change. Family is also the most important thing, but your priorities change. So in 2010, I remember going to my wife and saying, Jackie, in the next cycle in 2012, I either want to run for judge or run for DA. I was friendly with David Roger at the time, and I had asked him in 2010-ish if he was going to run again. He said, probably not. So I'm thinking, okay, in 2012, I'm either going to run for a trial court judge or run for DA. And lo and behold, in late 2011, David resigned. There was no option. The county commission had to make an appointment. That's the rules here. So I went to my wife again. She's the second boss in the family. And I said, Jackie, this is an opportunity to get appointed to a job. And she said, go for it. So I applied. I think there were initially 8 people that applied, and there were 3 finalists. And what was unique was the county commission, which was the body at the time that had the responsibility to appoint, did so on interviews on live TV. Wow. So the 3 finalists, me and 2 others, on live television appeared in front of the county commission for a few hours to answer questions. Wow. And then they had to make a selection, and I was able to convince enough of them to appoint me. So I think it was January of 2012 is when I received the appointment and took office a month later. Wow. So in a couple of months, it'll be 12 years.
Wow. Once you're appointed and you have the job, very similar to me going through a Senate confirmation for being the chief financial officer, it's hard to determine whether you're going to be there for 2 years while you're with an administration, or you end up running again and getting elected because you're kind of new to it's a countywide seat. You're no longer in your ward anymore. You're everywhere. And, at that point, you're trying to figure out, you haven't had to make too many promises politically or to the constituents. You've had to make them to board or commissioners. So how do you reconcile the goals in that interim period where you don't want to come in and turn the place upside down and do, you kind of gotta get your bearings, but yet you want to be able to get enough results to be a credible candidate when you get ready to run? What was your process once you got appointed?
Well, I was the new guy on the block, and I was a criminal defense lawyer coming in to run a prosecutor's office. So there was some people that had a hesitancy about how would he do, what's he going to be like. But I just, earned the respect, I think, of my colleagues. I'm a very people-oriented person. I walk the hallways. The DA's office is divided up into 4 divisions, and we're in 3 different locations across the city here. And I make the rounds. I go to my different divisions. I walk the hallways. I talk to people. I had to make some difficult decisions early on. And I think I gained the trust and the confidence of the people in this office. And again, I just try and do, I know this sounds so cliche, fairness and the difference between right and wrong. And I'm not perfect. I collaborate a lot. I surround myself with a lot of real qualified people. I like to have people around me that are not yes men. I want to hear the diversity of opinions, and I'm very open. I have an open door policy. It helps me earn the confidence and the trust of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Just kind of an aside. You and I were talking a little bit about, we met downstairs in the open out there, and my experience working in law enforcement and different, district attorneys that I've had a privilege of working alongside, especially when I was on the council. We're in your office here, and I remember being in Orange County's district attorney office, and I remember looking the back of the door where the suit and the extra shirts are always kept because you guys are always having to go to court or be on TV, and there was a bulletproof vest. And I was like, and you and I joked about it. It was a little bit of an intimidation factor. It's like, wow, this isn't just dealing with somebody at Costco who's really angry that you put the cell phone tower near her house. I mean,
as a city council person, yeah.
As a city council person, you got real things, and so it was just interesting the gravity of this role, and like you said, and the way you've kind of organized. I also, thought it might be helpful to just the way the DA office is kind of structured and how you kind of have it set up, criminal, civil, then you have kind of the family side of that. And then I can't remember what the fourth one was, but it'd be interesting just to hear a little bit about, the way that is set up for the county.
Sure. Well, I'm the largest law firm in the state of Nevada. More lawyers in the Clark County DA's office than any other private or public office. We have about 190 lawyers now divided up into 4 divisions: the criminal division, the civil division, the juvenile division, and my family support division. A lot of people don't know that DA's offices, many of them, have what are called family support divisions, which are in charge of collecting unpaid child support. If you're a wealthy family and you're not getting paid child support you believe you're entitled to, you go hire a lawyer. But a lot of people can't afford lawyers. Lawyers are expensive. So the DA's office will represent the custodial parent in attempts to collect unpaid child support. And last year, I believe that my family support division collected $135 million in 1 year.
Wow.
For children and custodial parents right here in Clark County.
That's awesome.
And I brag about that because most people think of the DA's office as what they see in the newspapers and television, prosecuting criminals. And we do that. And that's the heart and soul of my office. But I do have those other divisions too.
And other stats I think are interesting. The total number of cases that your office handles a year, approximately, what is that?
Oh gosh, the number fluctuates. It depends on what statistic you look at. We receive cases, and then we have an approval rating. We approve, about 60 to 70% of our cases. But I use this statistic. We receive about 250 cases a day.
Wow.
I've got 10 lawyers that sit about 100 feet from me right now that all they do 7 days a week is review cases to determine whether to approve them or not.
Right. A
lot of cases.
Yeah. Yeah, I only bring that up because I'm a quant numbers guy, and I just think it's, again, a little bit of the gravity of this office is this is not one of the offices where you just kind of show up. You've got to be able to kind of get throughput, and the citizens of Clark County definitely depend on that perspective. Do you think that being on the city council got you a little bit closer to balancing like your personal opinion on cases and what should happen, and versus you're really representing the people's perspective of what should happen? And the case point I would give as an example, without getting into the details of it, like the case that went through with Jonathan Lewis, who was just a very sad case of a high schooler that was in an alley, and again, I'm just representing what I've read in the news, but and got beat up by 8 to 10 people, and was actually beat to death, and it was caught on video. And so, as a parent of 3 boys, you kind of look at that and you're outraged. But some of those kids in that case were ages, near adult to 12 or 13, and there was
13 to 17,
and there was a lot of focus on whether those kids should be evaluated as adults or not. And again, not to get into the merits or the lack of merits of the case, but it's almost like it's what you feel as a parent, which is your personal feeling, and then it's what does the community expect of you. And I know that being on the city council, I really had a feeling of, it opened me up to having a view of what my neighbors and my majority of the people would want me to do versus what I want to do as a parent. Did your city council time help balance that, or do you think that in this type of a job it really is a little bit more technical?
Well, I think that to make the right decision, there has to be a balance of a lot of factors. I'm a human being.
Yeah.
So certainly my personal feelings
Yeah.
come into play, if you will. But what I learned on the city council was to talk to the community. On a regular basis, I'd ask people their opinions about things. And I do that as the district attorney. I'll be sitting in a coffee shop. I have my favorite Starbucks. I have my buddies.
Yeah.
Most of them are retired.
Yeah.
But a lot of ordinary citizens that I'll talk to, because a lot of the cases that that one, for example, and others that are in the newspapers and television, a lot of people have opinions. We had a super high-profile case where two juveniles purposely ran over a retired law enforcement officer out of California who was riding his bicycle. And they purposely ran into him, hit him, and he died. And because it was filmed on video, one of the offenders was filming it on his smartphone, it made national attention. So I like to talk to people, what do you think about this and what do you think about that? Because there's a diverse opinion on almost every issue. So I incorporate what normal people, I call them normal people, the people I run into in the supermarkets, in the the Starbucks. But I meet with my people here in the office. I have excellent lawyers. I have a lot of career prosecutors that have a lot of experience. I meet with law enforcement. Law enforcement are invested in cases. They spend hours and hours and hours. They respond to crime scenes. So they have very personal opinions. So I try and gather all of that into what my ultimate decision is. So I think being on the city council is where I started that kind of approach to things, and I've carried it on to my role now as the DA.
As you have been going through all of these years within the DA office, and you've probably seen some of the changes, I'm in the technology business. So, you kind of look at, people see stuff on TV that has to do with the forensic parts of technology, but what about the operational side of 250 cases a day? Do you find that technology has a place that, I will tell you, being at DHS, the equivalent of somebody who would be running the office like yourself, there would be a management portion of the office that would actually focus on the efficiency of the office. How involved are you in that? And any thoughts on, is it getting more efficient with some of the use of the new technologies?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're behind the times. We're the government, and the government only has so much money to spend, and the government has a lot of people reaching out, the different county departments that have needs. So we're behind, if you will, from the technology standpoint. We're finally going to a paperless system, because up until recently, all of our files are still hard files. So we're a little behind, if you will, but I have great people here at the office. I have great people that, run the various departments. So we're improving on efficiency, but there's more room for improvement. What I do is I manage people. I was a trial lawyer for, most of my career until 12 years ago. I still have an itch to get back into the courtroom. I do a lot of courtroom watching, the big cases. I have kind of a philosophy. I have to make decisions on a lot of big cases. And the phrase I use is, if you read about it in the newspaper or see it on TV, I've got my hands on it. But I like to go to court to observe the offender. And I know this sounds kind of weird, but I believe in demeanor. I believe in a person's attitude. And I'll go to court and I'll just kind of watch the offender on occasion to see what his attitude is like. But I'm so fortunate to have great people that work here in the office that do the day-to-day operation.
Yeah, one of the things I really wanted to talk to you a lot about was the fact that you are in a high pressure situation. Like I said, example, being in the city council, we had stuff happen, or at the county on county boards, and it'd be a crisis. And, when something would happen in non-law enforcement side, a crisis would be a bunch of us trying to figure out, like, do you put out a statement? Who says what? Do we have all the facts? That could be something you deal with almost every day. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about your crisis management process and, being able to very quickly diagnose and figure out what is exactly going on, what do we say, and kind of sometimes tempering yourself and your office before, you would, sometimes you need to because you don't have all the facts, but sometimes the community wants to know what the heck is going on. And so you don't have a choice. And so it's like playing, time chess. You got to hit the button back and get back in the game. What is your process for that? And is it something that you work team wise or, what is that individually that you do here within the office?
Well, the simple answer is I never go anywhere without this 24/7. The best example I can give you is anytime there is a crisis, mass shooting, or an officer-involved shooting. We're a large community here, so we have a lot of officers that get involved in situations where they have to use deadly force. So every officer-involved shooting, I'm notified. I have a great group of lawyers that respond to every officer-involved shooting. I talked with the sheriff here in Clark County. A lot of communities have police chiefs. We call him the sheriff here. I have a great relationship with our current sheriff. Our past sheriff is now the governor, Joe Lombardo. So I think a lot of it is based on communication and relationships. Yes, I'm asked for my opinion all the time. I get requests for TV interviews almost daily. I'm pretty selective because I think if I'm on television too much, people lose the effect. I lose credibility. So I'm very selective of which subject matters I give interviews and which, frankly, which outlet I give interviews to. But I'm very open. I do give interviews. I think part of my job is to communicate to people what's going on. The police are the first responders. So when there's a crisis, it's the police responding to that crisis. But depending on what that crisis is, my office is usually involved from the get-go, in the background. We work with law enforcement on the authorization and preparation of search warrants and other investigative tools. But I'm always informed of everything. I respond to certain crime scenes. We had a terrible case here just about 3 or 4 weeks ago where 2 Nevada highway troopers, highway patrol officers responded to a scene where there was somebody asleep at the wheel on a freeway off-ramp. And these 2 troopers responded. And while they were outside of their vehicle attending to this person who had fallen asleep at the wheel, a drunk driver slammed into both these troopers and killed them both. And that was a horrific day in this community. And I was notified, this occurred in the wee early morning hours. I was notified very early on, and I decided to go to the briefing by our police department. And then I wanted to go out to the crime scene. I wanted to get a feel for what happened because I know that offender who's currently in our system, we're prosecuting this person. That's a case where I am going to make the ultimate decision whether we go to trial, whether we plea bargain. So I wanted to get a feel. And I also wanted to show support for law enforcement.
Right.
So that's a roundabout way of saying that I have good people that work for me, that keep me notified on a daily, hourly basis, and then just relationships with other stakeholders in the community.
Yeah, Steve, it was interesting. I kind of preparing for our discussion. I looked at a bunch of different things that you're doing. One of your high-profile cases was the Tupac Shakur shooting, and and again, this is not a true crime discussion, but the thing that I thought was interesting in the way that you handled that is there was a kind of an informal press briefing that you were doing. And somebody asked you, hey, 27 years, why are you doing this now? And you're making the moves on this. And, your answer was very deep. And I think that, basically you responded and said, hey, I've been on both sides of crime. And, when you levy a potential murder charge on somebody, that's something they're going to deal with for the rest of their life. So we take that very seriously. So it's not just we want to go after somebody to go after them. It's like I realize the implication of putting that on Duane or his family, and I want to make sure, that we had enough evidence and when the time was right. And it was a very kind of a wise man, type thing to say, reminding the community, hey, we're really thoughtful here at the DA's office. And I thought that, that I think the way that comes across to a community, you're not a quick to judge type of guy or a headline guy. And I just thought, that type of process really must come across really good in the community because, I think Las Vegas, not being from here, it definitely has a reputation of a lot of stuff going on here, and, the UNLV shooting that was just, you got all these things. So it wouldn't be for the lack of crime that does happen here. But it was comforting for me, being a California guy, to hear the guy that's actually running the, Las Vegas or the Clark County to be that, hey, slow it down. Like, we're not rushing to judgment here. And 27 years, we had to make sure we had it right. What other thoughts do you have on stuff like that? Because it is, once you levy something on somebody, they just can't walk away. That follows them forever. And if they're not really guilty of something, that's a big burden.
Yeah, those are heavy duty decisions. The Tupac Shakur case is very unique.
Yeah.
I mean, there are children and teenagers walking around today with Tupac Shakur t-shirts that were not alive when Tupac was alive. So I was told early on that this is going to have a wide-ranging effect, not only on Duane Keefe D. Davis, the person who's been charged with this crime, but the amount of attention. Mm-hmm. And I was told, this was placed on my radar, about a year ago, that there was some new information coming to law enforcement. It might be coming over to our office. Then about 6 months ago, I started getting briefings on this. And I was told that this case is going to get as much attention as any other case. We had the O.J. Simpson case here, not O.J. 1, that was the murder in Los Angeles. Right. O.J. 2, which is the case involving the sports memorabilia. Coincidentally, my wife, Jackie Glass, was the judge on the O.J. 2 case. And I was in the private sector at the time, and there was huge attention. I mean, we had the network trucks parked outside the courthouse for a month. A lot of attention. I was told that the Tupac Shakur case was going to be even more. So that's one aspect of it. But regardless of the attention, you want to do what's right versus wrong. So, this is not the typical case where you have eyewitnesses and a lot of great forensic evidence and a confession and fingerprints and DNA. Mm-hmm. This prosecution is based upon a number of Mr. Davis's statements, mm-hmm. and there's a whole variety of reasons that are being, posed for his statements, and a lot of factors. So I knew that it would have a wide-ranging effect, not only on Mr. Davis, mm-hmm. who's in his 60s now, bringing a murder case 27, 28 years later, mm-hmm. but the reaction from the community. So it weighed heavily on me. But again, I get the good people around me, law enforcement, my people, and people in the community. But it was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. We feel strongly that he committed this crime, mm-hmm. and that's why we went ahead and charged him with murder.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, no easy steps here in the DA office, that's for sure. Steve, as we get ready to close, I wanted to talk a little bit about just maybe a message that you might want to have for the audience. That, part of our discussion that we've went through and we've talked about, your career progressions, as if you put it, starting in San Diego and kind of the getting on both sides of law, criminal defense, and then actually prosecuting. People that might be interested in kind of going down that path, or they're looking at, the legal profession or something like that. What would be your take on the current state at this point? Do you think it's a good move with all of the focus going on, or what would be your view?
Well, I could spend an hour answering that question. Law enforcement has changed over the last 5 or 10 years. With the Floyd incident, and a number of other things, Law enforcement we were always the good guys. But there's been a number of incidents in this country where law enforcement, made mistakes. Police officers are human beings, and a number of them have made mistakes, causing a lot of strife in this community, to almost, make law enforcement be the bad guys and prosecutors be the bad guys. The good news is I think the pendulum is swinging back. I think people recognize and respect law enforcement. We're not perfect. We don't get it right all the time, but we get it right most of the time. We work in a system that is probably the best system in the world. We have a constitution. We protect people's rights. We try and be careful when we infringe on those rights. But no, I would advise young people today, number one, do what's fun. Do what you have a passion for. I've said this many times, when it stops being fun, do something else. But a legal career is excellent. But it's not the only one. Mm-hmm. I have a daughter who's a stand-up comic / actress. I have another daughter who's a lawyer. Mm-hmm. I'm friends with people that have, all walks of life. Mm-hmm. But I think, the most important thing is be honest with yourself, do what's fun, and respect people. And I think you will receive respect in return.
Yeah, that's awesome, Steve. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show today, and just wanted to thank you for your service here, and thank you for everything you're doing for the county, and and again, just to be able to take some time today to be able to go through where you're at, really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate your kind words. It's been fun, and maybe we'll do it again. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.